Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a massive, heavy burden that so many of us are lugging around without even realizing it. I'm talking about that invisible backpack stuffed full of other people's opinions that you carry with you everywhere you go. We're going to explore the fascinating psychology behind why we crave validation, and more importantly, how outsourcing our self-worth actually damages our core self-identity.
You know that exact visceral feeling, right? Your pocket buzzes and suddenly you are completely trapped in this weird waiting game. You just posted a photo or maybe sent a really vulnerable text, and now you're just waiting for the reaction. You're counting the hearts, checking the views, and if the response isn't quite what you expected, your mood just literally plummets. This is the modern trap of outsourcing your self-worth to a crowd of bystanders. Okay, think about the kind of texts we sometimes send. Things like, "I was really stupid to say that, wasn't I?" Or, "Did I say something wrong?" Cognitive behavioral therapists actually don't see these as innocent little questions. They see them as linguistic red flags of a compulsive need for validation. They're basically indirect requests used to fill an internal emotional void. Whether it's self-deprecation disguised as a question or excessively overthinking silence, it's a constant, irrepressible quest for external reassurance. It really just shows that we're seeking something externally that we can't quite provide for ourselves internally.
Section 1. The Biology of Belonging.
Now, before you go judging yourself for any of those texting behaviors, it is absolutely crucial to understand that you are not broken for seeking approval. You are simply biological. Think about it. Back on the ancestral savanna, social rejection from your tribe meant literal exile and death. So your brain's fear center, the amygdala, evolved this hypersensitive radar for social disapproval. When someone leaves you on red today, your amygdala lights up screaming, "Danger, abandonment imminent." It still interprets social rejection as a life or death survival threat, even though, in our modern world, a lack of likes or an awkward silence is completely harmless.
But here's where it turns into a total psychological trap. In behavioral psychology, there's a concept called variable ratio reinforcement, and it operates exactly like a casino slot machine. When you get a compliment, boom, your brain releases a hit of dopamine. It feels amazing. But because the reward of validation is completely unpredictable, sometimes you get it, sometimes you get crickets, your brain gets hooked on the game. The sheer unpredictability of praise acts like a neurological sugar rush, keeping you continuously pulling that social slot machine lever.
Section 2. How approval fractures identity. So the crucial point we really need to get into is what actually happens to our core self when we constantly do this. A fascinating study published in the International Journal for Multidisciplinary Research gives us some incredible, empirical data on this exact validation trap. The researchers specifically looked at young adults, a time that's already marked by intense identity exploration, to see exactly how the need for approval interacts with something called self-concept clarity.
Now, self-concept clarity is super interesting. If you have high self-concept clarity, your beliefs about who you are, they're rock solid. You're stable, internally grounded, and you have highly confident self-knowledge. But if you have low self-concept clarity, your identity is fragmented. You're basically shape-shifting just to maintain social acceptance, dealing with chronic self-doubt. Your identity becomes something that is socially constructed by the people around you rather than being internally integrated.
And when researchers tested 120 young adults, the results were striking. They discovered a dramatic negative correlation of negative 0.625. Basically, this proves definitively that as your compulsive need for approval goes up, your self-concept clarity drastically goes down. When you rely that heavily on other people's evaluations to define yourself, your internal sense of identity actually becomes deeply unstable.
Actually, the data is even more staggering than that. It reveals that 39.1% of the variance in a person's self-concept clarity is directly predicted by their reliance on external approval. To put that into perspective, nearly 40% of your identity's stability is tied to how much you rely on external validation. That is a massive chunk of your core self that you are just handing over to the totally arbitrary standards of the crowd.
And we can see the real-world fallout of this everywhere. When your identity is socially constructed, the hidden costs are enormous. We're talking identity diffusion and confusion. We're talking severe emotional dependency, where romantic partnerships can devolve into exhausting parent-child dynamics because one person constantly demands reassurance. Plus, there's a profound suppression of your authentic self-expression. You end up highly vulnerable to manipulation, essentially letting others pull your puppet strings because you're constantly hyper-monitoring your behavior just to fit in.
Section 3. Rebuilding internal self-worth.
The really good news here is that we can rewire these biological urges. We can unlearn these childhood patterns. Psychological experts recommend a 3-step cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, detox method.
Step 1. Identify your validation triggers. Catch yourself in the act. Is it the post-meeting hangover where you overanalyze every word you just said? Or maybe the texting limbo where you stare at your phone? Step 2 is to challenge the narrative. Stop the mind reading. Assuming people are judging you is a cognitive distortion. Ask yourself, do I actually have evidence for this, or is this just fear? And step 3, definitely the hardest, is tolerating uncertainty. You have to practice just embracing the silence of unanswered tasks, teaching your brain that safety comes from your own self-assurance, not from instant replies.
Making this psychological shift is a real game changer because it helps you conquer the spotlight effect, that completely false belief that everyone is constantly watching and judging you. Spoiler alert, they aren't. They're too worried about themselves. Conquering this leads to what is honestly the ultimate freedom, which is simply being okay with people being wrong about who you are. When you stop chasing external validation, you accept that someone might think you're selfish for setting a boundary, or they just might not like your vibe. And you realize that is absolutely fine.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one big question to chew on. Will you continue performing for the crowd, constantly outsourcing your worth? Or are you ready to build an identity that actually thrives in the silence? Ask yourself how much of your true identity you're willing to sacrifice just for a little bit of digital applause. Developing internal validation doesn't mean you reject encouragement, it just means you shift your primary source of self-worth inward. Imagine what you might discover about yourself if you finally set that heavy, invisible backpack of opinions down for good. Thanks for joining me today, and I really encourage you to start building a self-concept that is completely, unshakably your own.